Welcome to this edition of the Journal Podcast, a place for thought-provoking discussion from the world of insurance and beyond. I'm Christopher Shadforth, Communications Director with the Chartered Insurance Institute Group, and I'm joined today by one of my colleagues, Harry Elliott, who's our brand manager. Lovely to have you with me today, Harry.
Thank you for inviting me, Chris.
Because you're here because we're going to discuss the history of the CII.
I know, I'm very excited.
You're very excited. I'm very excited. We've both been reading about the history. You for a bit longer, because I guess when you joined the CII and becoming brand manager, you needed to know something about what we were about and why we came into existence.
Absolutely. It's being the brand manager, I see myself as a temporary brand guardian. There's been many before me. There'll be some after me. And yeah, considering I studied history at university, this is just the perfect subject to crack on with today.
Fabulous. Well, look, in today's episode, we're going to be exploring, as we say, the origins and evolutions of the CII.
We'll be looking at how it began, why we formed, and even how our physical presence and identity has evolved over time.
Yeah, we'll cover four themes. The foundation of the Institute, its visual identity, or the devices as we call them. The role of the journal, and here we are in our new podcast studio, the sister publication to the physical edition, the Journal Podcast. And we'll also be talking about the story of the offices as well, I suppose our physical presence on the ground. So with that all in order, let's start with the fundamental question of why did institutes exist after all?
Exactly. What were they precisely trying to solve? What was the issue at the time?
Well, we've both got this wonderful book, 60 Years of the CII, 1897 to 1957. How much did you pay for yours?
Only £4, which I gather was a bit less than yourself.
Yeah, I paid £40 for mine. So supply and demand and all that. I think you bought yours a little bit before mine. It must be a rarer commodity these days, but it is a great book, and it is written by the secretary of the CII back in 1957, H.A.L. Cockerell, and we'll be referring to this quite a lot in this podcast. But according to Cockerell, writing in the book, the purposes were fourfold, and he says, first, the social element has its part, as the members of any occupation have much common ground for conversation. Further, intimacy sweetens competition. Second comes benevolence. The benevolent instinct is perhaps most easily aroused in relation to those who follow a man's own occupation. Thirdly, almost every profession or business has commercial aspects, the discussion of which may lead to agreement on what constitutes fair competition and what practices are generally regarded as unethical. And last, and most important, provision must be made for the education and instruction both of practitioners and of the young who aspire to qualify themselves. All these four purposes, social, benevolent, commercial, and educational, have been present to a greater or lesser extent in associations of insurance men.
So it's not purely technical, is it, Chris? It's very much community, it's ethics, it's development, it's a wide range of things.
Yes, Harry, that's exactly right. And it's reinforced in an 1879 description where the Institute is described as not representative, but personal, promoting friendship, harmony, mutual guidance, and even uniformity in practice.
So right from the very beginning, it's about standards as well as relationships with other members of the profession.
Yeah, it's especially about creating opportunities for mutual instruction, particularly for younger members. So the objectives are clearly social, educational, and commercial.
And what I took from the book, Chris, this all starts very much at a local level.
Well, absolutely. And Manchester in 1873. That's where the first institute was founded. And Cockerell writes, when the first insurance institute was set up in Manchester, it was no new thing for insurance men to meet for the discussion of common problems. And there we are, 1873. They've already been discussing common problems. They decide to get together and actually bring themselves together to have a broader conversation about it.
And we mustn't move on without referencing that great example of the Bristol Institute.
I think this is just one of those little quirks, isn't it? Where the people are having ideas in real time, and the ideas in one particular area are different from ideas elsewhere. And so what Cockerell writes in here about Bristol is that the original institute was styled the Insurance Social and Musical Society of Bristol. And he writes in here that its purpose was to form a society and hold monthly meetings during the winter months at some central hall at which select musical entertainments should be given by the members with professional assistance where necessary, and at which smoking and social intercourse could take place.
That's fantastic. I need to get an invitation to the Bristol Institute, clearly.
Different times, weren't they? Different times.
But then at some point, Chris, these separate institutes start coming together and beginning to resemble a bit more like what we know of today. Is that right?
Yeah. So a key moment comes with James Ostler, and he invites members of his council to a dinner at the Reform Club. And as Cockerell puts it, under the soothing influence of the fragrant weed, hesitation gives way to agreement.
That's the best decision-making technique there on the show.
Well, there's definitely a theme, isn't there? We've got smoking at the Bristol Institute. I don't know what weed refers to back in 1896. I'm not a historian of that. I'm not a historian. I mean, I could presume, but it might just be tobacco. But what we've got here is we've got this meeting at the Reform Club, and what we have Ostler writing of the day is that the experience of our institute, so this is those local institutes that have been founded by this point, and there's 10 by this particular moment in time, especially of the older ones, so, they've been in existence for, just over a decade at this point, is that the friendly intercourse which our meetings secure tends to promote mutual respect between honourable rivals in business, and to maintain the ethical standard without which no official regulation of competition can ever be affected. So here we have ethics as the cornerstone, the foundation of the Chartered Insurance Institute. And we've also got this point that way before the Financial Conduct Authority existed, or before the predecessors of that organisation, the pioneers establishing this particular body are saying it doesn't matter. They were quite prescient, saying there will be regulation coming, but it doesn't matter what that looks like at any moment in time. We will be here to set the standards based on ethics. And here we still are, setting the standards with a code of ethics that is still in place today. It's evolved over time, but ethics are fundamental to the organisation.
It's great to see that come through right to the day. So we can see that 1897 is the key founding moment, but also talking about the mutual respect between members of the profession. It's really cooperation within competition, I guess, is one of the key elements.
Absolutely. And then we move into, I suppose, the formation of the Federation of the Insurance Institutes of Great Britain and Ireland. And this all happens in 1897. There's a meeting, there's a number of resolutions that are put forward. Delegates are sent home to go and ratify them. And by August of that year, the Federation was declared to being. And as Cockerell writes it, the great experiment had begun.
That's some great foreshadowing from the author there. So that's the key founding moment. But what then does this new federation actually do? Because federation is definitely not a word we use anymore describing ourselves.
Yeah. So what does the body do? Well, I mean, the Cockerell writes that the Federation must necessarily be an examining body. That is front and foremost what they've determined at that point in time.
So therefore, it's setting the standards for the profession.
Yeah, exactly right. But what they're also determined is that the local institutes themselves will retain responsibility for teaching. So they're encouraged to run classes and provide education, which then facilitates those students being able to take their assessments, which have been set by this parental body.
So the central authority being the federation or institute, as we would now call it, but it's with local delivery.
Yeah, and in many ways, exactly what we've got today. And we always celebrate what the local institutes bring to us as an organisation. And we've got these hundreds of dedicated volunteers up and down the country who do so many brilliant things. Yeah, they do CPD. They do celebrate the successes of their members. They hold wonderful annual dinners where they bring the communities together. What they do today has been born out of what they were doing all those years ago. And then comes another key development, which is the journal.
And when does that all start, Chris?
So This is discussed in 1898, and by 1899, we've got the first edition of the journal, which has been published, and 1,500 copies of it have been distributed.
So you can see very quickly it does really become the shared voice of the profession.
Absolutely. I mean, people were having those discussions. They then decided to write up those discussions, and those early editions of the journal, absolutely fascinating. One for a different day, but there are some wonderful, wonderful things in there. There's a particular, I mean, there's one that I recall, which is an individual in there who claims that he could not think of anything that the members might not have conceived of already themselves that he might write about, but he still gave it a go. And I look back at it and say, well, I'm sure you were imparting knowledge, and we've been looking to impart knowledge ever since.
That's fantastic. So this is all going on, but when did the members and the people at the institute start to think about the journey to becoming chartered?
Yeah, so we're now into the early part of the 20th century, and Samuel Pipkin of London is chairing the executive committee meeting in March 1906. And at that meeting, it was decided to recommend to the conference to seek a royal charter. And what Pipkin saw back then, or what he foresaw, was a project designed entirely to strengthen and to put on a permanent basis the respective local institutes by affiliating them to a central organisation with its headquarters in London. So at this point in time, the headquarters are in Manchester, and we'll talk more about the offices later. He goes on, the whole governing authority seeking the one objective of creating and maintaining an institution that shall afford teaching facilities to and direct the studies and test the efficiency of those engaged in our business. And he also says that this body will provide a technical library or keep a register of men and their qualifications, so that talent and capacity may be economized and spread by bringing together those who seek appointments and those who seek men. I think that's kind of an early jobs board, isn't it?
It sounds very much like it, doesn't it? But am I right in saying, Chris, this is not an immediate process? It's just certainly something that takes time to really come through.
Yeah, and even in 1909, it's still under discussion. The decisive moment actually comes in 1911 when Sir Frederick Rutter confirms that a revised petition has been lodged. And in his presidential address of that year, he says, what we wish to see is that every youth and every man in the employ of our companies who has any determination to justify his choice of the profession in which he is engaged should, in the first place, become a qualified expert, and, in the second place, by contact with his fellows imbued with the same ambition, and by appreciation of the ethics, there's that word again, with which we endeavour to govern and surround our business, become, at the same time, a better man, armed at all points to grapple with the exigent demands of commercial life.
So you can almost pinpoint that moment, Chris. That's the moment the intent becomes action.
Exactly, leading to 1912, when the ambition of becoming a chartered body is actually realised, and we become the Chartered Insurance Institute. So with that and becoming the Chartered Insurance Institute, we've got a new name for the organisation. We've evolved from what was a group of local institutes through to this federation, through to the Chartered Insurance Institutes. And I suppose we should probably go on and talk about the visual identity of the organisation as well as its name. So we've got the devices. And what's the first of these, Harry?
The first president to wear the presidential badge was Robert McConnell. Ordered it in 1926, and it was of gold, bore the Institute's device, which was an open book bearing the motto Concilium Scientia, excuse the pronunciation, but it was on a background of rowan leaves and surrounded by the words The Chartered Insurance Institute, Incorporated 1912. The origin of the Institute motto is actually not known, and even in its meaning has been subject of dispute among Latin scholars.
Are you a Latin scholar?
I'm not quite.
No.
very much on the road. No.
I'm certainly not. So what does it actually mean? Does the cockerel tell us?
He says generally interpreted, and this is the interpretation 1957, I think we can safely say it's the same today, is generally interpreted as counsel and knowledge, and the badge was emblazoned when the institute was granted its arms in 1933.
And it's really quite simple, isn't it? That first visual device. Very, very simple. But then it evolves into something more formal, doesn't it?
Yeah, so we talked about 1933, and the institute applied for a grant of arms, which was made in the following terms, and I quote: "Azure between two chains, fess-wise 3 anchors, argent in chief, a salamander in flames, and in a base a garb or," which does sound rather garbled, especially when I say like that. But these symbolize the various branches of insurance, and these were on the initial grant of arms in 1933, but equally on our crest, you can see in 2017. So we've got the crest in front of us now, and we can actually talk through all those bits, because all those bits I just mentioned are still very much relevant and in use today. So if you have our coat of arms to hand, you look at it from the top bottom. At the top, you have the sword of St. Paul's. And I'll be honest, Chris, it took me an embarrassingly long time to actually clock where the hand is on the sword.
Yeah, because it's not actually on the handle itself, is it?
It's not at all. It's not on the handle. It's not wielding it. It's not aggressive, and that's entirely the point. It's grasping the blade itself to sort of neutralize any aggression and to really symbolize the mitigation of harm and risk that insurance provides.
Okay, yeah.
And then just below that, we have a unicorn and a lion, which symbolise the national animals of Scotland and England. And unlike in the animal kingdom, that both the lion and the unicorn have scales. They have fish tails almost, which symbolises the overseas activity of the institute, which is not only very pertinent today, but even back, again, Cockrell says that in 1900 and 1901, links were made with Toronto and the Montreal Institute. So really, there's always been an international outlook of the CI, which is really...
And you go back to the end of this book, and there's several dozen institutes around the world that are affiliated with this first body.
As I say, the fact that's continued on and go from strength to strength today is just fantastic. Other little bits of elements on the crest itself, we have a book, which symbolises on one obvious level the education we provide, and the fact we're a qualifications body. We can award qualifications in insurance and financial planning. A really interesting bit I picked up from the book, during the Second World War, the Institute, along with the British Red Cross, was organising the sending of papers to prison of war camps in France, where students wanted to still continue their education. And I think it said on 3 occasions, examinations were organised within the prison of war camps, which is a fantastic commitment.
I read that. I was astounded by that, almost the show must go on.
Yeah.
Those individuals that were being facilitated in their studies and their assessment while POWs, such that, and there's quite an interesting passage around that, isn't there, with the way in which a lot of the work of the CII does fall considerably during that war period. But there's still this determination, this desire, this recognition that when they get back from war, there'll be a profession that needs to be served.
It's so commendable, isn't it? Yeah, it's fantastic to read that. And then wrapping off elements of the crest, underneath the book, we have a chain which symbolises marine insurance and also more generally security that insurance provides. We have the fire, talk about fire insurance, and within the fire is the wheat sheaf, which is life insurance. So that is a real whistle-stop tour of all the different elements of the CII crest.
And this is the second version of this visual identity, I suppose, because we reinterpreted it in 2017. The version before that, we've probably had 4 devices over the years, haven't we?
It is, and whilst I think it's very striking, very modern, the one we have today from 2017, it still has all those elements right from the very beginning. It hasn't deviated too much, which is great to see.
So just looking at the crest on the screen here, we've got a screen in front of us if you've only got the audio version. The crest is sat above the journal, this being the journal podcast, and it's easy to overlook the importance of the journal, I think.
Yeah, could you talk to the importance of the journal, Chris?
I think what they alighted on all those years ago was the fact that sharing knowledge has a benefit. The sharing knowledge for the evolution of the profession, it's not sufficient for one firm back then, and it is not sufficient for one firm today to be able to ensure risk across every aspect of life. There are certainly lessons that could be learnt across those different aspects of life. So you have this idea of diversified portfolios, people coming together, share knowledge, everybody benefits. And that's what the journal did back then and what the journal still does today.
So I guess you could say it's almost that central theme, that central tenet that underpins everything intellectually.
Well, yeah, I mean, we see it as the thread that runs through. We want to be talking about things that interest the profession, interest our members, but interest the profession. We want to be continuing to evolve that discussion and evolve thinking around the profession. If that's the written word and if that's the visual identity, I also want to just talk about our physical presence as well, because we're sat here today. We're in our wonderful new offices. We're in 30 Old Broad Street now. We've got this new podcast studio, which is terrific. It's a wonderful facility to have. But I want to go back and think about how we've ended up here.
Yes. So where does it all begin, Chris? As I certainly know it's not 30 Old Broad Street.
No, it's not. And as we said earlier, the first vessel for this body was shared with Manchester. And then we have this decision that was announced back in 1912 that the headquarters would move from Manchester down to London. And Cockerell just he picks out some of the most wonderful passages from our historical records. So he says that shortly after 1913, or after the 1913 conference, the Institute moves offices to the same building as the London Institute at 11 Queen Street, Cheapside. But I have to read this out because it's just wonderful, and it is such a departure from, what you might have anticipated the Institute to have developed back then. It says, if you turn into 11 Queen Street, you find yourself at one end of a long and gloomy looking passage with a staircase at the end. After ascending 3 pairs of narrow and very steep stairs, if you have any breath left to take an intelligent interest in your surroundings, you find yourself in an attic as bare and comfortless as the passage which you quitted far below. This, gentlemen, is the headquarters of the University of the great insurance profession, and to accentuate the position, in your ascent you pass, a floor below, the quarters of the London Institute, where there is a good reading room and library, and a floor below that a meeting hall which, by courtesy of the local institute, the Chartered Insurance Institute is allowed to make use of from time to time. The local institute is well housed, but the parent has to betake itself to the garret. How brilliant is that? Clearly a very frustrated individual. That was W.E. Gray, who was the president from 1921 to 22 in his presidential address. Well, look, that was as it was. I mean, of course, we're all familiar with Alderbury Hall, which was then established as the home of the CII for many years and opened by King George V. And in fact, it's worth mentioning, isn't it? We've had royal patrons ever since, from King George V right through to King Charles III, who agreed upon becoming king that he would continue to be our patron as well. So it's wonderful to have that royal connection still with us.
Just back on the offices, Chris, it's quite soon after that, or not sort of soon, we eventually, I should say, move into the heart of the financial district of London.
Well, exactly. Quite some time after, we've gone from 1934, 35 and the opening of Alderbury Hall through to 2001. And we moved to new premises. Frankly, Alderbury Hall had become quite a tired building, and the decision was taken that the Institute needed more modern day services available to it. And so, yeah, we moved to Lombard Street first of all. From Lombard Street, we moved to Fenchurch Street and the Walkie Talkie building. And then most recently of all, we moved here to 30 Old Broad Street. So that's where we're based today.
So even the offices, I guess, reflect the evolution and growing stature of the Institute. And it's just a shame some of the contributors to this book aren't around to see 30 Old Broad Street. Hopefully they wouldn't be quite so scathing in their criticism. I'm sure they wouldn't be with a fantastic premise.
That's what W.E. Gray would have made of this place. I'm sure he would have been happier here than perhaps walking up that passage and getting slightly breathless. We've got a lift for a start. Well, look, I mean, that brings us to a close, and we covered a lot of ground in this particular pocket. I mean, there is so much rich content just in this book, but all those early editions of the journal, and that's just scratching the surface as well. You and I went on a quick scavenge around our storage facility to see what else was in there, and actually, you're in the process of going to go back and find some more material that we're going to put in our office in order to remind us of the past as well, aren't you?
Yeah, it's so important. That would be a trip just after Easter, and yeah, can't wait to find out what's in the archives, and it will be in the 30 Broad Street office very soon for all to see.
Well, look, from local societies and sometimes even musical societies to a unified body, that's the story of the Chartered Insurance Institute in a very succinct nutshell. It's one of professionalisation, collaboration, and identity.
And hopefully the messages come through. It's about bringing people together for learning, for improving, upholding professional standards.
Fabulous. Thank you ever so much for joining me today, Harry. It's been brilliant. And thank you for joining us on this edition of the Journal podcast. Please like, review, and subscribe. You'll find more episodes there. And hopefully, we will be broadcasting long into the 22nd century as much as we're now in the 21st century. Thank you very much.